Welcome, everyone, to the July Lunch with NEMA. This is Heather Riggs here in the NEMA office in Arlington, Massachusetts. So today we will start off just introducing you guys to the webinar software if you guys are new to this. So in the chat feature, this is how you're going to be interacting with Phillip. If you guys have any questions at all, go ahead and type them in the chat feature. But to get us started, if you guys could tell us where you're actually viewing this from, that would be great. So we can see who's on the line with us. We have a big group today. Lots of writing. While you guys are typing in there, I just want to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be available on the NEMA website later on this afternoon. You can find the presentation and prior presentations that we've recorded under the Lunch with NEMA section. So if you ever have some free time and feel like listening to one of the presentations or have to leave early, go ahead and view them on our website. I also want to do a big shout out to the Danbury Museum in Connecticut. Thank you for closing your museum today and joining us. That was pretty awesome to see on Twitter today. So to get things going, awesome, welcome everybody. I'm just going to move it over to Phillip because we do have a lot of really great information. If you guys are a big data heads like I am, today's information, Lunch with NEMA, will be awesome. So Phillip, I'm going to pass the baton over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather, and hi, everyone. My name is Phillip Cox. I work at LaPlaca Cohen. We're a strategy marketing design firm based in New York City, and we kind of service only cultural clients, so broadly defined, and we'll get into that in a second. But you may probably know us through Culture Track. Culture Track is our pro bono research initiative that we've been running for many years, and really excited to share it with you all today. Some of you may have seen this presentation in an earlier form. So if you have, welcome back. If you're new, welcome to the program, so to speak. I'm going to go through kind of what is Culture Track and go into methodology just very briefly to start off. And then we'll get into the data and the fun part and kind of telling you what insights we have found in our new study. Before I get into this, like Heather said, this is a lot to throw at anyone in about 45 minutes to an hour. Know that everything I will show you today is online at culturetrack.com. So both this presentation, a more kind of fulsome report that has more narrative and even more graphs, and then all of the raw data is online for you to do with what you wish, whether to slice and dice in ways that make sense for your organization, share with your boards, with your staff, whatever it might be. We really encourage everyone to use this. It's totally free and open for everyone. All right. So with that, I guess we will get started.
Sorry, Phillip, before we go on, if you guys do have any questions at all during the presentation, if you just want to put them in the chat feature, after the presentation, we will do a Q&A with Phillip just to keep that in mind. But if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat feature, and I will ask them at the end of the presentation. All right, back to you.
Cool. Okay, sounds good. So about Culture Track. For those who are not familiar with it, Culture Track is a national online study of cultural consumers. We really think of this as a sort of hearts and minds study, not just interested in the what and the how and the when of cultural participation, but also the why. Why audiences are thinking and behaving the way they do, really getting at those emotional drivers that are influencing cultural participation today. So we see ourselves, within the larger ecosystem, a lot of great research going on across the field, but we really focus on those emotional drivers, the motivators and barriers that are influencing participation. It's a really large study, over 4,000. We think it's one of the largest in the country. And we have been running it since about 2001. It's a tracking study. And what that means is we're asking a similar type of question to a similar type of person at different points in time. So we can see trends, right? We can see how things are fluctuating over time across a variety of verticals. However, in 2017, we decided to sort of reevaluate our methodology from the get-go. We'd been talking a lot to those who had been using our Culture Track data over the years, and we're realizing that this tracking aspect was so important for these organizations who are using the data, but it was also sort of a blessing and a curse. We were being locked into some questions that we were asking for many years, since 2011, even earlier. Things like, do you use a smartphone, and are you on social media? Things that are just out of date and not as actionable for organizations today. So we made the step this year to really do something different. We decided to take our overall sample of 4,000 and split it into two. So the first is our tracking data, which we've had forever and will continue to have. These are a set of really core questions that will allow us to see trends over time. It's still a very small margin of error and a sample size of about 1,000. What is interesting about the sample is it's a select set of cultural activities we're asking about. So what we might call the benchmark arts, what the NEA would call the benchmark arts, things like art museums, ballet, classical music. But we had been seeing some stirrings that culture is far more than just these sort of high art activities. It's a much broader set of activities that people are thinking about what culture is today. And so we really knew, as we reimagined what culture track should be, we wanted to get a much more diverse variety of activities. So that's where our future forecasting data set comes in. And this is the bulk of the data you'll see today. We really think of this as kind of the future of what culture track is in this transitional year. It's a totally revamped questionnaire built on both our own desk research, our experience with clients, and a lot of qualitative research we've done just out in the field asking people and organizations like yourselves, what's the kind of data you need most to make actionable change. So that is the bulk of what you'll see today, and it's a much, much larger set of cultural activities we're asking about. It's about 33 different ones, everything from your art museums and ballet and classical music to public parks and botanical gardens and food festivals and street art. And so you'll see the ramifications and manifestations of that in the data in a very short second. Again, a huge sample still, 3,000 in a very small margin of error. And what's interesting about this broader number of cultural activities we're asking about is it has some interesting ramifications on our sample. So you can see here our sample for the very first time looks more like the US population as a whole, and this is really important to us. Culture track demographics are on the left of all the data you'll see today, and on the right is the US population. So again, we're really mirroring the US population in a more accurate way by broadening our scope and asking about more cultural activities rather than just what might be considered Eurocentric or the benchmark arts. Just some housekeeping here. When we're talking about generations today, these are the brackets we're going to be using. So millennials 20 to 35, Gen X 36 to 52, baby boomers 53 to 71, and then what we call pre-wars. I've heard a lot of different names of it, but it's a kind of a class of people or generational cohort that not a lot of organizations think about, but we are increasingly thinking is super important, is the pre-wars, those born roughly after World War II. So with that, we will get started with what we're calling a paradigm shift as our first section. Since we last fielded Culture Track in 2014, a lot of things have changed that is important for us to understand kind of the societal shifts that are happening. Culture does not happen in a vacuum. So what else is going on outside of culture that may be having effect on the cultural world and cultural participation? There are new modes of communication and connection. The way we interact with the world through digital technology is totally different. Everything is almost filtered through our phones. A cultural activity hasn't even happened for many people if they haven't taken a picture of it and Instagrammed it. So that's a very important shift that you'll see infused through all of our insights today. There are transformed patterns of giving. The way audiences are thinking about loyalty and transferring a loyal act to actually donating to an organization or a cause they care about, the motivators and bears there have really changed as we've been doing this research, and we'll see how that plays out in a second. And then finally, and perhaps the most foundational of all of these, is endless options for leisure time. When we're thinking about cultural organizations, the competitive set has never been larger. So what does that mean for the art museums, the operas, the ballets of the world when they're competing with parks and food festivals, but also things like Netflix, right? So again, we'll see how this plays out, but it's a much wider field than it's ever been, and there's never been more choice for cultural consumers. So all of this sort of ladders up into what was the big finding of 2014, an expanded definition of culture. So we have, again, art museums next to parks and destination food and drink experiences next to more traditional forms of culture like musical theater. But we're seeing in 2017 that this definition of culture has become even more elastic, up to the point that it's almost breaking down and becoming meaningless entirely. This chart is showing activities defined as culture. So of all the different activities audiences said they do, we asked them, okay, do you actually consider this culture? And you can see some really interesting things. Things like opera and ballet and classical music. These activities that we think of as core, high art, artsy culture are so low in terms of what people are thinking as culture, what it is. Yet we see community festivals and music festivals, food and drink experiences. These are the ones rising to the top as really defined as culture. Another thing I always point out is working in a historic museum or an art museum. These are activities that, the majority of audiences say, yes, this is culture. This is a place I go to have an intentionally cultural experience. But it's not as high as you might think. So only 63% say an art museum is a cultural activity. It's a full 40% say it's not. So again, what does that mean for our competitive set as we're thinking about all the other choices audiences have, why they choose us? Just assuming they will come and partake in our experience because it is culture is no longer enough. So this traditional notion of culture is extinct, so to speak. What is culture's purpose in this new increasing complex world? And we really believe through our research that we have the audience, that the audience is the one defining this new definition, and we have to be responsive to their thinking. So fortunately, the very audiences that are breaking down this definition are defining a new one. They're helping to rebuild a new one, not so much based on characteristics that define certain activities, but around impact. The impact that these experiences and the activities make on the personal, the self, and the world around us. So we asked audiences, this is very expensive and time consuming to do, but we felt it was important. An open-ended box in the questionnaire saying, what is the impact of culture for you? And all the answers sort of aggregated statistical for responses. And these are their verbatim quotes here. So the first is transforming perspective. That culture, it helps change the way I think, challenges the norms, anything that makes you feel anything, and question what you already know. Building community. That culture builds stronger communities by bringing people who may not think they have much in common together. Educating the public, perhaps one of the core purposes of culture, broadening my horizons, understanding of life and situations, and helping me learn about other people in the world. And then this last one is one we're hearing more and more in our practice. Perhaps we've never heard of more than now in this present very unique political moment, but about fostering empathy, bringing people of many different backgrounds together, and cementing the fact that the world is better for having so many diverse cultures. It needs to bring understanding and acceptance. So these are some really powerful, poetic, inspiring impacts that culture has. The audience is really telling us that culture matters. And again, we shouldn't be hung up on what is or isn't culture, but understanding that culture has an impact on audiences' lives, and how can organizations really, hypercharge that impact for audiences. So now going in a little bit more depth, section we're calling the new cultural consumer. And we start with any research project with some research questions. So changing audience attitudes. What is the mindset of this new cultural consumer with this broad array of activities at his or her fingertips? Why do these audiences engage with culture in the first place? And finally, what causes them to stay away? Because we know that perhaps this is most important, understanding what are the barriers for participation for those who are non-attendees rather than those who are frequent attendees. So here's our chart that everyone looks forward to every time we release this data. These are our motivators for cultural participation. And a lot of interesting things here. Again, this will be all online for you to dig into more fully. But I'll just pick out a few to talk about today. And the first and perhaps most important is having fun. This is one that people, their heads explode when we see this. Everyone reacts to it in a different way, and we have a lot to say about it. But having fun was the number one motivator for cultural participation in our 2017 study. This is not to say that all these other motivators are not as important. We can see interest in the content as still 78%, our number two motivator. But audiences are clearly telling us that in this particular moment, this desire for fun, enjoyment, release is a key motivator for cultural participation. This doesn't mean that they're asking organizations to dumb down their content, to not provide challenging experiences, but to get them in the door, there has to be some sort of offer that they will have an entertaining, enjoyable experience. And again, we really think this is something unique to this moment, that fun, or however we may define fun, can clear the way for this higher level experience that cultural organizations uniquely can provide. Another important motivator kind of concept to point out is this desire for all things new. We can see experiencing new things at 76%, learning something new, 71%. This desire for novelty, we'll see this in many different parts of the study, but is really driving, again, cultural participation. And the final one to talk about here is feeling less stress. One that we have seen in different levels since we've been doing this study for many years, but this is the highest we've seen it. And it's not just a certain demographic group. It's not just millennials who are so stressed. It's across the board, every age group. Say that feeling less stress or desire to release anxiety is a key motivator for cultural participation. And yeah, I'm seeing the comments. All of this, as I said at the top, is online. Please go and check it out and download. And also love to hear how people are using this data, so do stay in touch. So those are our motivators, but when it comes to addressing why culture can drive audiences away, personal relevance is critical. So again, looking at the barriers, because we know that's so important for really understanding the attitudes of why and why not audiences are coming or not coming. And we're seeing this idea of personal relevance. So what do I mean by that? This is my Price is Right moment. These are our top 5 barriers to cultural participation. The 5th is its value is not worth the cost. Notice we say value here. We really feel strongly that it's about value. It's not about the price. I mean, I spend a certain amount of money for my Netflix account and my iPhone, but if I can't pony up, $10 to go to the museum or go to a play, that's a value proposition question. It's not about the price itself. I couldn't find anyone to go with. It's number 4. Again, this idea that culture is first and foremost meant to be social. These next 2 are ones we call masking responses, or the white noise of market research. It's what we see in every study of these that we do. It's inconvenient, or it's just an awareness issue. I didn't think of it. We really think these are kind of omnipresent and can only be mitigated to a certain level. But this top one is something to really take note of. It's not for someone like me. This is pretty profound, that across the board, the number 1 barrier to cultural participation is not for someone like me. This is more than just price. This is more than just the hours that you're open. It's about the type of experience you're presenting. It's about, do I feel like the space was made for me and mine? Do I feel welcome here? Is this a place that I would return to and recommend to other people like me? We think that this is really one of the most crucial tasks for culture going forward, is really being as inclusive to all types of people, as diverse and inclusive as possible. And we're really excited to have data to point out that this problem exists. So at the end of every section, we have something that's called spotlight stats. We have so much data, thousands and thousands of Excel pages and numbers. And so there's only so much we can fit into a top line 45-minute presentation like today. But we did want to, in certain places, just hone in on some really interesting statistics that pop for us that were just too good to leave on the cutting room floor. So we're just going to bring these and pepper them in throughout, really focusing on certain demographic groups that are meant to be sort of actionable takeaways for you all to bring back to your organization. So the first is about accessibility. That accessibility fails without empathy. People with disabilities are 59% more likely to avoid cultural activities because of a previous negative experience. So again, if these types of audiences have trouble accessing your facilities, have problems with wayfinding, then they will not come back, and that's a huge deterrent for them. So how can we overcome this barrier? By listening really authentically to these audiences to understand what they want. Similarly, diversity means representation. People of color are 82% more likely to stay away because activities don't reflect people with a range of backgrounds. Again, this idea of the radical welcome. It's more than just the tactical thing, like hours and price, but it's about your staff. How diverse are your staff? Do they represent and reflect your actual visitors? Or type of visitors you want to have? Is the content you're presenting to audiences, does it represent a diverse and inclusive viewpoint? So these are the questions to ask. So that was our motivators and barriers section. Now we want to go even deeper into 3 different topics that we hear are again and again top of mind for cultural organizations. And the first is being digital. This is really the elephant in the room for so many organizations that no one we feel has really figured it out. And I don't pretend to have conclusive solutions to provide here, but some really interesting data to share to hopefully point the way to some questions that will be helpful for you all. So audiences have a range of perspectives on how digital technology currently enhances or detracts from the experience. A simple sentence, but one we think we need to say over and over, that there is no right answer yet when it comes to digital. Audiences really are divided on whether digital is a help or a hindrance. We actually asked this question: do you prefer a digitally mediated cultural experience, or do you prefer a cultural experience that is totally analog, digital free? And audiences were split. About a third said they wanted digital in some capacity. About a third said, no, I totally want an analog. I'm digital, I hate it. And then another third said, I could go either way, I don't really care. So to dimensionalize these responses, we asked these deeper questions. Of the people who said, yes, I really want a digitally mediated experience, here is why. It makes the activity feel new. So the presence of technology kind of gives this flavor of newness and novelty. It gives me a deeper understanding of content. I just have a deeper understanding of what's being presented with me, and technology is the vehicle for that. The activity is shareable digitally. Again, the social component that I can share the experience I had and relive it later with friends or family or whatever it might be. And then finally, access to more detailed info. Comparison to a deeper understanding, I just have more information at my fingertips that I can call up if I want to. So that is why digital appeals, but then of course we have to look at the flip side. Why does analog appeal? And you'll see some interesting mirroring effects here. So these are the people who said, no, I hate digital. I don't want digital to have any place inside the cultural experience. Better connection to the content. Digital is clutter, gets in the way. It inhibits my connection to the content. Digital is complicated. Without it, things are just more simple. There's more focus on the activity. Again, digital is distracting. And then finally, feels more authentic. To us, this is kind of the biggest aha moment, that for many audiences, there's a sentiment that certain activities are meant to be experienced a certain way. And digital is inauthentic to the way it was supposed to be experienced. So you can see when we compare the reasons why digital is a help and why digital is a hindrance, there's some mirroring here. Everyone is, at the end of the day, really just interested in connection and understanding of the content. Some people feel like digital is a way to do that, and others feel that digital gets in the way of that sort of outcome. So that is the type of experiences audiences have currently had, however. Of course, we can't ask audiences to blue sky thinking, what is the digital solution that you're most excited about, when they haven't experienced it yet. But we did ask the question, in an ideal world, are you at least open to a digital experience? Is that something that intrigues you? Not giving them, it's going to be an app or it's going to be some sort of tool. It could be anything, but is that something you're at least initially open to? People overwhelmingly said yes. This is per activity, so you can see some interesting variations here. But across the board, people are open to it. So we believe it's really up to the field to innovate, to listen to these very general audience desires of why digital might help or hurt the experience, and then to prototype and innovate. And so this really leaves some questions to guide a digital strategy. Does the digital tool in question enrich the experience, or does it distract? Does it simplify or add unnecessary complexity? And finally, does it feel authentic to you, your content, and the mission of the organization? Again, we're big believers of an app will not solve your problem. A digital solution should be a means to an end, not the end to itself. And audiences are really telling us that as well. So some spotlight sets here, again, all about digital, but looking at certain demographic cohorts. For parents and families, tech is a plus. Parents are 52% more likely to say wearable technology would enhance their cultural experience. Again, because it simplifies their life, it gives their kids something to do. But as we're thinking about who's our audience for digital technology, it's not just millennials, it's not those just on the cutting edge. There are other benefits to audiences that we need to be aware of. Further, there's benefits for diverse audiences. Social media can make a broader impact, because people of color are 31% likely to say integrating social media would enhance their experience. We know that social media, specifically as an advertising tool, is very effective for diverse audiences, but this is saying something broader and I think more profound, that as part of the experience itself, that social media can be used as really a tool for inclusion. So the next section, to go a little bit deeper into, again, specific topics like top of mind for everyone, is about loyalty. We're calling this the loyalty revolution, and you'll see why. Since 2011, there's been a flat or downward trend in memberships or subscriptions. This is maybe something you're feeling at your organizations, but we're hearing it time and time again that loyalty is really dying with the cultural world. And we attribute this to what we have called in the past cultural promiscuity, this phenomenon that, audiences, again, with so many different leisure options at their fingertips, they can choose. They no longer have to be single patrons to one or two organizations. They can sample. Of course, this is not good for specific organizations because it depletes their membership or subscriber base. And we're seeing this in the data as well. Again, this is a moment where we're bringing in some tracking data. Important to see trends here over time. Visual art memberships on the left, 26% to 22% in 2017. And then performing arts subscriptions on the right from 23% to 21%. So this is sort of dire news that loyalty, or at least formal membership subscription loyalty programs within the cultural world are not doing so well. However, this kind of gave us pause because we knew, of course, in our day-to-day life, that it doesn't mean people aren't loyal anymore. Everyone is loyal to something. I'm loyal to the Starbucks around the corner. I'm loyal to the dry cleaners that I've been going to for years. So why is it that there's disconnect, that we're just not as loyal to cultural organizations? So we asked audiences, taking this sort of outside-in approach to understand all the things that people are loyal to outside of culture, how can that help us inform and hopefully reimagine loyalty models with the cultural sector? And this is what people told us. Restaurants and bars, retail stores, sports teams. These are the type of things that people are consistently loyal to. And then we can see how low cultural organizations are on the list. This is a huge eye-opener for us. Just above airlines, which is pretty depressing. So there's a lot of work to do. So we wanted to get to the root of this problem and really interrogate the definition of loyalty for audiences today. So we asked our respondents, how do you define loyalty? What does loyalty mean to you? What is a loyalty-based relationship? And this is not just for culture, this is for anything. And so audiences told us, outside of culture, audiences view loyalty as a personal relationship. Their ideal partner, to continue the metaphor, is trustworthy, consistent, and kind. So what do I mean by that? Here is a chart of our motivators for loyalty. Again, we asked audiences, any type of organization or cause, what are you loyal to? What motivates you to be loyal? And this is what audiences told us. We can see the top responses here. Trustworthiness at 61%. Consistent quality, I always know what I'm going to get. And then finally, just kindness, customer service at 55%. And what's interesting here is we can see these sort of transactional benefits that we traditionally associate with loyalty-based relationships. Content and products, rewards, a discount. These are much lower than these sort of higher level motivators like trustworthiness, consistency, and kindness. So we really believe we're moving away from, again, this transactional one-way model of loyalty to something that's much more relationship-based, much more reciprocal. And we've seen already organizations sort of innovate in this area of really treating their members like humans, listening to them, understanding their wants and needs, and not just thinking that they can reel them in with better perks and discounts, but with a more empathic relationship that is reciprocal in two-way rather than just one way. So some spotlight stats here for the loyalty revolution. When it comes to parents' loyalty, keep it simple. Again, thinking about specific audience segments to target when it comes to these new innovative loyalty models. Parents are 21% more likely to join a loyalty program that simplifies their planning. So again, this is interesting. Parents are just looking for anything that makes their day easier. But we have to really build in listening and evaluation to our process as we're thinking about these new models to understand what audiences are wanting. So if we're trying to target parents, this is something perhaps to keep in mind. For younger generations, to tweet is to care. Over a third of younger generations, so those are people under 35, feel that engaging on social media is an act of loyalty. So this is pretty important, and we think a huge finding from the entire study. Younger generations see posting about a great experience they had on social media at your organization as a really profound, authentic act of loyalty. And it's something that organizations need to acknowledge. The question then becomes, how can we cultivate these younger audiences, not just engaging with us on social media, but building them into frequent attendees and finally donors. So it's a much longer tail, it's a longer cycle of engagement, but an important point to keep in mind that really your digital strategy on social and the way you engage with your audiences is a great way to build your brand and to build loyalty. So our final section here is a great kind of handshake with the loyalty section, and we're calling this the case for support. This is all about philanthropy. Audiences regularly experience many forms of culture, so this expanded field, film, music, festivals, and more, that don't solicit or depend on donation to exist, right? Think about it. But watching my Netflix or something on TV or listening to music, many of these types of activities, they're not asking me for my money. Many are commercial. However, audiences still give consistently to organizations that do solicit donations. So this is really good news for the field. This is projected plans to donate in the future, so take this as what you will. But in 2011, 33% of audiences said they plan to give within the next 12 months. In 2017, 41% said they did. So that's a pretty significant increase. Why are people giving? The top reasons for donating to culture all relate to one thing, and that is social impact. So this is extremely important going forward for organizations as we're thinking about philanthropic strategies, specifically as governmental support becomes less and less reliable, that social impact is really driving private donations. So here are our motivators for donating to culture. And we can see these top responses here: belief in mission, want to impact the community, want to impact the world. These are all kind of coalescing around this idea of social impact, and this is the top motivator for giving. On the flip side, it's a very similar story. Reasons for not donating to culture, other causes have greater impact at 25%. So this is a real challenge, I think, for organizations to figure out what does social impact mean for them, and how do they best prove that for audiences in really compelling, engaging ways. And we can learn, again, by taking this outside-in approach from other causes, organizations, fields that are doing this quite well. We wanted to know from audiences, okay, yes, you can say you give to culture, but what about all the other types of things that you open your wallets to? What can we learn from them? We can see the top causes: children, religion, health, perhaps not surprising, and how low culture is on the list. We believe that these other causes are really proving their impact in meaningful ways, whether that is through quantitative hard data. Of course, there's a certain urgency around health and human wellness that perhaps culture can never live up to. But that doesn't mean we can't try, or perhaps more importantly, prove our impact in ways unique to us. And that might be through qualitative means, through stories. This is something that culture does uniquely well. But we have to align on really what is the social impact of culture, what is the impact we make on communities in the world, And then how can we compellingly articulate that to audiences and potential funders? So in developing the new philanthropy, as we call it, some things to keep in mind. That it needs to be a dialogue-based relationship. Again, this two-way reciprocal relationship that is not transactional. It has to focus on results and impact. Again, there's more of this online, so I encourage you to check it out. But as we're thinking about generational differences between donors, increasingly younger generations, really led by this VC movement in Silicon Valley, is focused on ROI. Just understanding where exactly their dollars are going and being able to track their impact over time. So focusing on results and impact is paramount. Look beyond the field for effective models. Again, taking this outside-in approach. What can we learn from other organizations or types of causes that are really doing this well? And then how can we take some of that great thinking and apply it to our own organizations? And then, as I said before, understand generational differences. And again, I encourage you to look online. There's some really interesting stuff about how different ages of donors are thinking about giving and loyalty that kind of bespeak specific strategies that need to be taken for different ages. And so finally, the case for support, just some spotlight stats here. For pre-wars, community comes first. So again, these are those 71, 72 and up. But these audiences are 55% more likely to give to community organizations. So again, as we think about how can we best make the case for support, perhaps we're aligning ourselves with the other causes that audiences already give to, and really making the case that yes, culture is a part of this. An art museum, a theater, whatever, a park, whatever it is really embedded in the community. So why can't we be considered a community organization like that? Similarly, culture and social change are intertwined. People of color are 71% more likely to donate to civil and human rights organizations. So we've been seeing this increasingly of cultural organizations sort of wading in different ways, some more authentic to the missions than others, to these really hard-hitting political, social topics as a way to engage broader audiences. Again, if this makes sense to you and your mission, your organization, this could be a really effective way also to drive donations. And I would say this, we have people of color here, but this is also true of millennials and just younger donors in general are increasingly interested in civil rights, human rights, equality, these types of topics. So I know that was a lot of data. Again, this is all online at culturetrack.com, both this report, presentation, a longer document with more charts, and then the raw data in Excel tables. So I encourage you to get in and dig into that. Just to sort of wrap this up in a really bite-sized way, we're going to give you 5 takeaways and encapsulate each of our chapters here today. So without further ado, the first is about culture in quotation marks, because it's really this very meaning of culture that is being disrupted. And it requires a reimagination of what is the entire field itself, a reimagining of space, the type of architecture that we provide as part of the experience, the physical plant, and the experience, the program that inhabits this space, to inventing new types of programs and services altogether. And this is sort of the foundational shift that is driving all of these changes that all organizations, we believe, need to grapple with. The second is about relevance, that addressing people's individual needs, their rituals, and their backgrounds in really nuanced ways across all touch points is essential for engaging new and non-traditional audiences. The third is about connection. This is what we say is our tech takeaway, but we're calling it very purposely connection. It's not just about tech for tech's sake, it's about the holistic experience and tech's role within that. Audiences have divided attitudes about digital or analog, which is better. But the key to any sort of successful strategy is finding the most authentic way to connect more deeply to the content, experience, or each other. Again, digital is really the vehicle for these higher level experiences rather than something that just gets in the way. Fourth is relationships, that with audiences now viewing loyalty as a personal relationship, empathic, service-focused programs must replace existing transactional models. Again, this has ramifications on so many aspects of the organization, not to mention financial aspects. We always remind people that the loyalty models of the past, specifically theater memberships or theater subscriptions, these were not in their genesis meant to build more loyal audiences. They are a way to just earn revenue. We believe that we need to sort of reevaluate these models again and think about how can we best serve audiences so we can have long-term participation rather than just a way to check something off on the financial line. And finally, SROI. This is an acronym, again, we have kind of picked up from other industries, but this is social return on investment, one we think is super applicable and helpful for the cultural world. The future of cultural philanthropy will hinge on tangible, provable impact, with a greater emphasis on proving SROI, social return on investment. So that is it for me. Again, this is the link. This is a link to our kind of special microsite just for the study. There you can link out to our full website where you can download the data. It's all there. We encourage you to share this with your boards, your staff, anyone you think would be interested, inside or outside culture. And also encourage you to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We share a lot of data there as well, and kind of have a content platform going where we continue this conversation in many different ways that we can't get into here. So yeah, that is it. Heather, do you want to do questions if there are any?
Yeah, can I just say, wow, your 5 takeaways kind of resonated quite a bit with me just in general, because this is what the museum field has been grappling with for the last few years. So it's just interesting to see that it was like broken out in this type of study. Your takeaways that you mentioned, it's like, okay, these are the articles that I've been reading. These are the discussions that we've been having, at conference, in our journals, things like that. So it's interesting to see that this is what you have also taken away of, like, this is what we kind of need to start focusing on and thinking about. On that one. So I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to sit there. Does anybody have any questions that you want to type in the chat feature, and then I can ask Phillip? So Carol asked, did just not interested in it come up as a reason for not engaging in culture? Was that included in not for someone like me?
Yeah, let me go back to the slide. So it did come up, but was not high. These sort of, where is it? This sort of tactical, logistical concerns were, I guess I can just hold this way, bigger. It's not for someone like me is not really about interest, because we had that elsewhere. It's about kind of what I was talking about before, relevance. It just wasn't as high as these other ones. I didn't think of it. You could kind of frame in that way because it's about awareness, and I'm aware of the things that are just on my radar that I'm interested in. But just to be honest, it didn't rank in the top 5. Again, online, you can see how these barriers are broken out per activity. So there are some minor variations, not so much in the top 5, but in the lower rungs. This is just for an aggregate of culture in general of all the activities. But yeah, it wasn't in the top 5.
And I just want to say also with the social media and the acts of loyalty and the engaging, it's interesting because usually when I post something on Instagram, either within 24 hours or 48 hours or a couple weeks later, someone from that organization likes my photo. And I'm like, that's kind of cool, that they take the time to do that. So I totally understand, although I'm an older generation than millennial, that act of loyalty that, someone actually took the time to do that.
Yeah, and I think
a lot of places do that.
Yeah, and I think it's what the data shows is that younger generations are less likely to show their support through giving, through volunteering, kind of these traditional markers we would associate with loyalty, but they're way more likely to engage in social media. So I think for us, it's a call to action for organizations to really invest in acknowledging that and realizing that there's some really important conversations that have to be had on social media with, your donors of the future. So we think that's pretty important.
Okay, so Ben has a question. Tegan just wrote something. Sports teams ranked high in the loyalty category, but the factors contributing to loyalty, customer service, trustworthy, etc., somehow don't seem to speak to people's relationship to sports teams for me. Any thoughts on what else is or could be at work?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Let me just bring up the sports. That's a really good question. I don't know if I have an answer for you. It brings up a whole nother discussion of whether sports is culture. The development of this questionnaire literally took about 9 months, and we had many, many days locked into rooms of whether sports should be culture. I don't have a question. I don't have an answer for you, I think. Because I'm just not an expert in this, but I think we could extrapolate that, how do I dimensionalize a loyalty to a sports team? It's not just I root for the team, but it's the type of experience I have on site. It's the type of experience I have when I engage with them on social media. So just kind of like broadening our understanding of what loyalty means to something. Again, to Heather's point before, of it's the experience is not just when you're on site. It starts when you're thinking about it, and it ends after they've sent you that newsletter or that follow-up after. I think that's what I would answer, how I would answer that question. That's a really good point, and I can't say I'm just not an expert on that, unfortunately.
So Tegan makes a comment. My understanding is that it's not for someone like me doesn't necessarily mean it's not for me in the sense of I'm not interested in this cultural experience, but more I don't think this cultural organization is interested in me. That's an interesting.
Yeah. Yes,
take
I think that's a really good point. I would agree with that, and that is a point that we probably had the most discussion of, because it's so hard to pin down what that actually means, because it's so hard to describe. I'm just trying to bring it up. It's so hard to really describe this idea of relevance that for many of us who may have grown up going to cultural organizations and feel very comfortable in them, this is not something that we understand. But for so many audiences, there is this threshold fear of, this is a place that is intimidating. It literally looks like a fortress, as so many art museums do. It's not some place that I am meant to be. It wasn't built with me as a visitor in mind. And so the solution to this, there's not a silver bullet. It's all different types of touch points working in synergy to really broadcast this message that, yes, you are welcome here. We want you to be here. We want this to be a place that you help us create and sustain and perpetuate. That is how we describe it and how we've been hearing it from, people like you all who have been presenting this data too. But it's a really fascinating discussion that has so many legs and so many ramifications for the field.
Okay, and then Emma writes, if they are more likely to engage in social media, would that possibly mean that the donations or fundraising efforts could be more effective through a social media format than something like a traditional cast statement? That
is a great question, and I would say it depends on the target audience. We often bring in, when we do sort of innovation plans as well for organizations around loyalty and giving itself. And looking at sort of benchmarks like Lyft has, this roundup program where you can just round up your Lyft feed and give to charity. The Ice Bucket Challenge. These are really movements that have spread online and have raised a ton of money. And I think that's great. But again, those are targeting younger donors. And just based on numbers, older donors, no surprise, are just giving more money in dollar amounts. They just have more money to spend. So I think depending on who your target audience is, who you're trying to target as a donor, if it's a younger audience, then yes, something like a social media campaign, some really innovative, engaging way would be a huge win. But again, it's just about who you're trying to target.
Okay, and Doug is actually asking about some of your data. So can the data be accessed by age group? Doug is actually working at a university museum, so he's looking into digging into a younger subset of respondents to understand how its primary audience reacted to the survey.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Excel online has cross tabulations for generation, race, whatever it is. So check those out. And if you still can't find the granularity you're looking for, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can try to help you.
Okay, are there any other audience questions? This is now the time to ask them. I thought it was kind of interesting, the social impact for the private donations and stuff like that. I know a lot of the museums currently are kind of changing their social mission in a lot of ways, and I'm wondering if in the future that will actually impact their donations in a positive way, so that's just kind of interesting factor on that one. So Ellen is asking, was economic status factored into this study?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of demographic questions we ask at the end of the questionnaire. So what race or ethnicity do you identify? What age are you? Do you have children? What sexual orientation or gender expression do you identify with? Including, what's your employment status and what's your income? And again, online in the Excel and just a long document of charts, you can see a lot of those breakouts.
This is great. And one thing I know that we've been grappling here at NEMA, and we talk about quite a bit, is more of the audience loyalty and the personal relationship. That's definitely something that we talk about quite a bit, is that we do have a personal relationship with our audience. I mean, you guys are all here today, so I would hope that's a personal relationship with us. I'm just pointing out some of the stuff that I found interesting and stuff like that. Does anybody else have any other questions? Meg, did you have any questions?
No, I think you covered them all for me.
Okay. So I guess we're going to end there. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this session was recorded and will be available on the NEMA website along with the presentation, so you guys could download it. But as Phillip mentioned, the website, culturetrack.com, does have quite a bit of information on it for you guys to download, dissect, get into it. This is kind of what I like to do, is the data part of it. But hey, that's me. But Phillip, do you have any parting words or anything?
No, this is so wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you guys all again in August as we talk with Elizabeth Nevins about education programming and preparing for the school year. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you later.